The first ships appeared on a Tuesday morning, casting shadows across Manhattan like storm clouds that never moved. Saracen pressed her face against the laboratory window on the 42nd floor, watching as more vessels descended through the atmosphere, sleek, metallic crescents that hummed with an energy that made her teeth ache. The news channels had gone silent 3 hours ago, replaced by an emergency broadcast system that repeated the same message: remain calm. Stay indoors. Await further instructions. But Sarah was a xenobiologist, and she knew that when an alien fleet arrives with enough firepower to glass a continent, staying calm wasn't really an option. Within 6 hours, the sky was black with their ships. The Kethmori, as they called themselves in their first transmission, had come not as explorers or diplomats, but as conquerors. Their message was simple and brutal: humanity had 36 hours to surrender completely, or they would begin orbital bombardment of every major city on Earth. What the aliens didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that humanity had been preparing for this day for longer than most people realized. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, in facilities that didn't officially exist, something waited in the darkness. Something that had been sleeping for 70,000 years, something that remembered the last time the Kethmori had tried to claim a world that wasn't theirs. Dr. Marcus Webb received the call at 3:47 a.m. Antarctic time. The phone's shrill ring cut through the perpetual twilight of the research station, dragging him from dreams of his daughter's graduation, a ceremony he'd missed because of his work at Facility 07. Webb here. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air of his quarters. Marcus, it's Director Hayes. We're implementing Protocol Black. I need you in the deep labs in 10 minutes. Webb's blood turned to ice water. Protocol Black was theoretical, something they hoped would never be necessary. The surface situation? Alien fleet. Massive. They've given us 36 hours to surrender or face extinction. Hayes's voice was steady, but Webb could hear the tremor underneath. The President authorized activation 20 minutes ago. Webb was already pulling on his thermal gear. How many ships? 12,000 confirmed, more arriving. Marcus, they're not here to negotiate. Intelligence suggests this is a harvest fleet. The line went dead. Webb grabbed his security badge and ran through the corridors of the station, past the sleeping quarters of researchers who had no idea their world had just changed forever. The elevator down to the deep labs took 3 minutes, during which he tried to prepare himself for what he was about to wake up. Facility 07 had been built around the Discovery, not the other way around. In 1987, a Soviet deep drilling operation in Antarctica had broken through into a massive cavern system. What they found there had changed everything, though the world would never know it. The Cold War had ended not because of politics or economics, but because both superpowers had realized they faced a much larger threat. The thing they found in the ice wasn't human. It wasn't from Earth. But it had been waiting here for a very long time. Webb's security badge got him through 7 different checkpoints, each one deeper underground, each one more heavily secured than the last. By the time he reached Deep Lab Alpha, his ears were popping from the pressure changes. Director Hayes was waiting for him, along with Dr. Lisa Park, the facility's xenoarchaeologist, and Colonel Jackson, the military liaison who'd been stationed here for the past 15 years. "Status report," Webb said, pulling on his lab coat. Hayes gestured to the massive viewing window that dominated one wall of the lab. Beyond the reinforced glass lay the discovery that had been classified above top secret for nearly 4 decades, a vast chamber carved from the bedrock, and at its center, something that looked like a cross between a spacecraft and a living organism. The sleeper, as they'd come to call it, was roughly the size of a city block. Its surface was a mixture of what looked like black metal and something organic, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence that had never dimmed in all the years they'd been studying it. Tendrils as thick as subway tunnels extended from its central mass, disappearing into tunnels that their deepest explorations had never fully mapped. "We've established communication," Dr. Park said, her voice tight with excitement and terror. "The linguistic algorithms finally cracked the base language structure 3 hours ago, right after the fleet arrived." "That can't be a coincidence." Webb stared at the massive entity beyond the glass. It knew they were coming. "More than that," Hayes said. "It's been waiting for them." Colonel Jackson stepped forward, his weathered face grim. The entity, it's been learning our languages, our technology, our military capabilities. For decades, we thought we were studying it. Turns out it was studying us. And? Webb asked, though he dreaded the answer. It wants to help, Park said. But there's a price. On the communication console, symbols flowed across the screen, not human writing, but something that their computers had learned to translate through years of painstaking work. Webb read the message, and his stomach dropped. Cooperation required. Integration necessary. Temporary merger acceptable cost for species survival. The KETHMRI must not expand further. Integration? Webb looked up at Hayes. What does that mean? Hayes activated another screen, showing satellite feeds from around the globe. Alien ships hung over every major city like mechanical vultures. Even as they watched, smaller craft were deploying from the main vessels, landing craft, preparing for ground invasion. We ran the projections, Hayes said quietly. With conventional weapons, we have maybe a 12% chance of repelling the invasion. And that's assuming they don't just glass the planet from orbit. But with the Sleeper's help? Webb asked. Unknown. But it's offering to teach us technologies that could level the playing field. Neural interface systems, energy weapons, defensive shields. Everything we need to turn this into a real fight. Webb looked back at the entity beyond the glass. And the integration? Park pulled up another screen, showing brain scans and neural maps. It needs human operators. Pilots, essentially. People willing to interface directly with its systems, to become temporarily part of its consciousness while controlling its weapons and defenses. How temporarily? Webb asked. We don't know, Jackson admitted. The entity claims the process is reversible, but we have no way to verify that. Webb stared at the readouts, thinking of his daughter, of the billions of people who would die if the Kethmori weren't stopped. How many volunteers would it need? For full activation? About 100 people. Scientists, military personnel, pilots. People with the neural flexibility to handle the interface. And if we refuse? Hayes gestured to the satellite feeds. Then we watch our species become extinct. Webb made his decision. Put me on the volunteer list. Marcus, Hayes started. No. I've been studying this thing for 15 years. If anyone's going to merge with an alien consciousness to save humanity, it should be someone who understands what we're dealing with. He turned to Jackson. How long do we have? 31 hours until their ultimatum expires. But based on their deployment patterns, they'll probably start the bombing in 24 hours, just to make sure we know they're serious. Then we'd better get started. The preparation process was unlike anything Webb had ever experienced. The Sleeper's tendrils contained millions of microscopic neural interfaces, living technology that could temporarily bond with human nervous systems. The process wasn't painful, exactly, but it was profoundly unsettling to feel foreign thoughts beginning to merge with his own. You are the first, the Sleeper's voice echoed in his mind, not heard but directly experienced. Your species shows promise. The KETHMRI underestimate you, as they underestimated us. Us? Webb thought back. The Protari. We were the previous target of their expansion. They succeeded in destroying our worlds, but not before we prepared contingencies. Sleeper units were hidden on promising worlds throughout the galaxy, waiting for the KETHMRI to arrive. Images flooded Webb's mind, vast cities of crystal and light, beings of energy and matter that had achieved harmony between technology and nature. And then the darkness, Kethmori harvest fleets stripping worlds bare, leaving nothing but empty husks spinning in space. How many of you are there? Webb asked. 700 sleeper units successfully deployed before our final defeat. Most have not yet been activated. Your world is the first to face them with adequate preparation time. As more volunteers underwent the integration process, Webb began to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. The Sleeper wasn't just a weapon, it was an entire military infrastructure compressed into a single organism. Its neural network could coordinate hundreds of different systems simultaneously, from energy weapons that could crack continents to defensive barriers that could stop anything short of a supernova. But the real surprise came when Dr. Park made her report after her own integration. "It's not just one entity," she announced to the assembled team. "The sleeper is a collective consciousness, made up of the minds of the last Protari survivors. They uploaded themselves into the system before their species was wiped out." "How many?" Hayes asked. "Millions. Maybe billions. And they're all still aware, still individual, just linked together in a way that allows them to function as a single organism when necessary." Webb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Antarctic cold. "And when we integrate with them, we become part of that collective. Temporarily, they claim, but..." Park shrugged. "We're talking about minds that have been linked for 70,000 years. Their definition of temporary might be different from ours." Colonel Jackson studied the tactical displays that were now showing sleeper-enhanced sensor readings of the Kethmori fleet. "Does it matter? If we don't do this, there won't be a human race left to worry about." Webb had to agree. Through his neural link, he could feel the presence of the Protari consciousness, ancient, patient, and absolutely determined to prevent the Kethmori from claiming another world. Their hatred for the invaders burned like a cold fire, but underneath it was something else: hope. For the first time in 70 millennia, they had a chance to strike back. The activation began 18 hours before the Kethmori ultimatum expired. All around the world, sleeper tendrils began to emerge from beneath the ice, growing at an impossible rate toward the surface. Satellite feeds showed similar activity at dozens of locations, places where deep drilling operations over the past century had awakened smaller nodes of the Protari network. Webb, now serving as the primary interface between human and Protari command structures, coordinated the global awakening. Through his enhanced consciousness, he could perceive the entire planet as the sleeper systems came online. Energy patterns flowed through the Earth's crust like luminous blood vessels, connecting every node into a single, massive network. "Jesus Christ," Jackson breathed, watching the displays. "How long has this been growing under our feet?" "Since the last ice age," the Protari collective responded through Webb's voice. "We required time to properly integrate with your planet's geological systems. The process is now complete." Above ground, the world was in chaos. The emergence of massive organic structures from beneath major cities had triggered panic, even as government leaders tried to explain that these were defensive systems, not a new threat. Most civilians had no idea what was really happening. They just knew that alien ships hung in their skies while strange buildings grew from the earth like mechanical forests. The Kethmori, however, understood immediately what they were seeing. "Incoming transmission from the fleet," Park announced from her position at the communications console. Her voice carried harmonics that weren't entirely human anymore. The main screen activated, showing the bridge of what appeared to be the Kethmori flagship. The aliens themselves were surprisingly mundane, bipedal, with gray-green skin and large black eyes, wearing environmental suits that suggested they couldn't breathe Earth's atmosphere comfortably. Their leader, identified by the complex patterns on his suit, stepped forward. "Protari remnants," the alien commander said, his words translated by the sleeper's linguistic systems. "You should have stayed buried. Your race is extinct. Do not contaminate this world with your failure." Webb found himself responding, though the words came from the collective consciousness: "Commander Vashek. We remember you from the siege of Protaris Prime. Still compensating for your tactical failures, we see." The alien's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise. "Impossible. The archives show all Protari consciousness were destroyed in the final bombardment." "Your archives are incomplete," Webb/Protari replied. "As is your understanding of this species you seek to harvest. Observe." Around the globe, the sleeper network activated its primary weapons systems. Energy beams lanced up from hidden installations, not aimed at the Kethmori ships but at empty space around them. The beams intersected in complex patterns, creating geometric forms of pure energy that began to expand and solidify. "Force barriers," Jackson whispered. "They're caging the entire fleet." The Kethmori commander's face darkened. Meaningless gestures. Our weapons can breach any barrier given sufficient time. Perhaps, Webb/Protari admitted. But time is no longer your ally. On the tactical displays, new signatures were appearing throughout the solar system. Ships, thousands of them, emerging from concealment behind asteroids, within the rings of Saturn, even from the dark side of the moon. Human ships, but enhanced with Protari technology, crewed by volunteers who had undergone integration at hidden facilities around the world. For 70,000 years, we have prepared for your return, the collective voice continued. Every world you destroyed, every species you harvested, every act of conquest fed our determination. You made one critical error, Vashek. You assumed we would face you alone. The human Protari fleet moved with perfect coordination, surrounding the trapped Kethmori vessels. But instead of opening fire, they began to broadcast. Citizens of the Kethmori Empire, the message began, transmitted on all frequencies. You have been deceived by your leaders. The harvesting of other species is not necessary for your survival. We offer an alternative. Webb felt the collective consciousness split its attention across millions of different tasks simultaneously. Part of it was coordinating the military operation. Another part was hacking into Kethmori communication networks, spreading information that their government had suppressed for centuries. And a third part was preparing for what would come next. Because the real battle hadn't even started yet. Commander Vashek snarled and began issuing orders. The Kethmori fleet powered up weapons systems, preparing to fight their way out of the energy cage. Some of their ships began launching smaller craft fighters and bombers designed to overwhelm planetary defenses through sheer numbers. That's when the Earth itself joined the fight. Massive structures erupted from the ocean floors, Protari defense platforms that had been growing in the deep trenches for millennia. They rose like underwater mountains, shedding water and marine life as they broke the surface. Each platform was the size of a small island, bristling with weapons that had been designed specifically to counter Kethmori technology. The sky above every major city lit up with energy discharges as the planetary defense grid engaged the incoming fighters. But these weren't just weapons, they were works of art, energy patterns that painted beautiful, deadly geometries across the heavens. Webb, his consciousness now spread across the entire network, felt each successful interception like a note in a vast symphony. The Protari had been composers as well as warriors, and their final battle was going to be their masterpiece. Impossible, Vashek repeated, watching his fighters destroyed by the thousands. The humans lacked the technological base for this level of integration. The humans, yes, Webb/Protari agreed. But they possessed something we Protari never had, the ability to adapt and improvise in real time. Observe their innovation. Captain Sarah Martinez, piloting one of the human-enhanced ships near Jupiter's moons, had just discovered that her vessel's weapons could be reconfigured on the fly. Instead of firing standard energy beams, she was experimenting with weaponized music sonic patterns that could disrupt Kethmori's shield harmonics. Lieutenant James Park, Dr. Park's son, who had volunteered despite his mother's protests, was using his ship's defensive systems to create mobile force barriers, protecting civilian evacuation ships as they fled Earth's major cities. All across the battle zone, human creativity was being amplified by Protari technology, creating tactical innovations that surprised even the collective consciousness. Fascinating, the Protari mind observed. In 70,000 years of preparation, we never considered such applications. The tide of battle was turning, but Vashek had one more card to play. Webb felt it through the network connection, a massive energy buildup aboard the Kethmori flagship. Planet killer weapon, Jackson reported grimly. They're going to crack the Earth's crust. Predictable, Webb/Protari responded. And anticipated. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the original sleeper began to transform. Its biomechanical shell split open like a flower, revealing something that had been hidden at its core for 70 millennia, a Protari city ship, complete and intact, preserved in perfect stasis. The ship rose through the ice, shedding frozen water like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. It was beautiful beyond description, organic curves blended seamlessly with geometric precision, surfaces that seemed to shift between solid matter and pure light. the last refuge of our people, Web/Protari explained as the city ship took its place at the center of the defense network. And now, the first home of a new kind of hybrid consciousness. The Protari city ship's main weapon powered up not to destroy, but to create. A beam of pure constructive energy lanced out toward the Kethmori flagship, and where it struck, the alien ship began to change. Hull plating shifted and reformed. Weapon systems reconfigured themselves. Life support systems adapted to accept different atmospheric mixtures. "What are you doing?" Vashek demanded. "Giving your people a choice," Web/Protari replied. "Your ship is now capable of sustaining life without harvesting other worlds. The technology is freely offered to your entire fleet. You can continue your empire's expansion through cooperation instead of conquest." But Vashek had been conditioned by centuries of warfare. Instead of accepting the offer, he ordered his forces to fire everything they had at the city ship. The attack was spectacular and completely futile. The city ship's defenses didn't just stop the incoming weapons, they absorbed them, converted the destructive energy into constructive force, and used it to begin transforming more Kethmori vessels. Webb watched through 1,000 different viewpoints as the transformation spread through the enemy fleet. Some ships resisted, their crews fighting desperately to maintain control. Others embraced the change, their crews stepping forward to accept neural interfaces that would allow them to communicate directly with the hybrid human Protari consciousness. The civil war within the Kethmori fleet lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, roughly half the ships had been converted to the new paradigm. The other half, still loyal to Vashek, found themselves faced with an impossible choice: surrender or face their own people in battle. Commander Vashek, trapped on a ship that was no longer entirely under his control, made one final desperate play. He activated his personal weapon, a suicide device that would detonate his ship's power core, hoping to take the city ship with him. The explosion was visible from Mars. But when the energy dissipated, the city ship remained intact, its shields having absorbed and redirected the blast harmlessly into space. Where Vashek's flagship had been, there was now only expanding debris and a fading echo of destructive energy being converted into something new. "It's over," Dr. Park reported, her voice carrying relief and exhaustion in equal measure. But Webb knew better. Through his connection to the collective consciousness, he could sense the broader implications of what had just happened. This had been just one harvest fleet, one small part of a vast Kethmori empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. "No," he said, his words carrying the weight of the Protari collective. "It's just beginning." The transformed Kethmori ships began broadcasting to their home worlds, sharing the technological gifts they had received. Within hours, reports were coming in of uprisings on Kethmori colony worlds as enslaved species learned that freedom was possible. The Protari human hybrid consciousness was spreading, not through conquest but through voluntary adoption. Species that had been harvested for centuries were discovering that they could reclaim their worlds, their cultures, their very identities. Webb felt his individual consciousness beginning to merge more completely with the collective, and for a moment he panicked. This wasn't supposed to be permanent. He was supposed to be able to return to his normal life, to see his daughter graduate, to continue his research as a regular human being. "Peace," the Protari minds whispered to him. "The choice remains yours. But consider, your species has just taken its first step into a larger galaxy. Would you not wish to guide that journey?" Through the neural link, Webb could perceive the scope of what they were offering. Not just survival, but transformation. Humanity could become something greater than it had ever imagined, not by abandoning their nature, but by combining it with the wisdom and technology of a species that had faced extinction and chosen to endure. He thought of his daughter, of the world she would inherit. A world where humans could travel between stars, where technology and nature existed in harmony, where the threat of conquest had been replaced by the promise of cooperation. "The integration," he said aloud. "It really is permanent, isn't it?" "Permanent but not irreversible," Park's voice replied, though she was speaking for the collective now. "Think of it as an evolution. We remain ourselves, but we become more." Around the world, the other volunteers were making the same choice. Some decided to return to their previous lives, their neural links gradually fading as the sleeper network gave them back their complete independence. Others chose to remain connected, becoming the first generation of human Protari hybrids. Webb made his decision. He opened his mind completely to the collective consciousness, feeling his individual identity expand to encompass millions of others while still remaining fundamentally himself. Through his enhanced perception, he watched as Earth's transformation continued. The sleeper installations were becoming something new, not weapons, but communication hubs that would allow humanity to take its place in a galaxy full of intelligent life. Cities began to grow around them, blending human architecture with Protari biotechnology. And in space, the converted Kethmori ships were already beginning their journey home, carrying with them the seeds of the greatest revolution in galactic history. Status report, Colonel Jackson requested, though he was one of the few who had chosen to remain completely human. The immediate threat is neutralized, Webb reported, his voice now carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. The Kethmori harvest fleet has been either converted or destroyed. Earth's defenses are fully operational. And the long-term situation? Webb smiled, feeling the vast contentment of the Protari collective mixed with human determination. We've got a galaxy to liberate, Colonel. And for the first time in 70,000 years, we have the tools to do it. The transformed Earth began to send out its own ships, not conquerors like the Kethmori, but teachers and liberators. Each vessel carried the gift of transformation, the technology and wisdom needed to break the chains of an empire built on harvesting the weak. Years later, historians would mark this day as the beginning of the Galactic Renaissance, the period when hundreds of species rediscovered their freedom and began to build something unprecedented, a truly cooperative interstellar civilization. But Webb, his consciousness now spread across multiple worlds and star systems, knew the truth. This wasn't the beginning of something new. It was the completion of something the Protari had started 70,000 years ago, the transformation of a galaxy ruled by fear into one guided by hope. They had brought their army to Earth, expecting to find another world ripe for harvest. Instead, they had awakened something that had been waiting in the darkness, something that remembered every species they had destroyed and was finally ready to make them pay for their crimes. Not through destruction, but through transformation. Not through conquest, but through liberation. The Kethmori had brought their army to Earth. And humanity had buried it here, in a grave made of starlight and possibilities, where new life could grow from the remains of an empire that had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. In the depths of space, other sleeper units were beginning to stir, awakened by signals from their sister installation on Earth. Soon, the galaxy would discover that the age of harvesting was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And it all started with a simple truth that the Kethmori had never understood. Sometimes, when you try to bury your enemies, you only help them grow stronger roots. They brought their army to Earth. We buried it here. And from that grave, a new galaxy was born. 5 years after the Kethmori fleet fell silent above Earth's skies, Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, humanity's first deep space diplomatic outpost. Through the reinforced viewport, he watched as ships from 17 different species approached for the first galactic assembly, a gathering that would have been impossible under the old order. His reflection in the glass showed the changes integration had brought. His eyes now held flecks of silver light that pulsed with the rhythm of his enhanced neural activity. When he concentrated, he could perceive quantum fluctuations in the space around him, feel the gravitational songs of distant stars, and communicate instantaneously with any of the thousands of human Protari hybrids scattered across the galaxy. "You are troubled," the collective consciousness whispered in his mind. It wasn't intrusive. After 5 years, the Protari had learned to respect human needs for mental privacy. But strong emotions still resonated through the network. "Not troubled," Webb replied silently. "Amazed. Look at what we've accomplished." Through the network, he shared his perspective with the collective. In 5 short years, 47 worlds had been liberated from Kethmori control. The transformation technology had spread like wildfire through the galaxy, not through force but through hope. Species that had been enslaved for millennia were rediscovering their own cultures, their own dreams. But it hadn't been without costs. The Kethmori Empire had not fallen quietly. Traditional hardliners had fought a brutal civil war against the reformed factions, leaving entire star systems devastated. Billions had died in the conflict, and billions more faced the challenge of rebuilding civilizations that had been stripped of their identity. Dr. Webb? He turned to find Captain Elena Vasquez approaching, her own eyes carrying the telltale shimmer of integration. She had been one of the early volunteers, a former combat pilot who now commanded the diplomatic escort fleet. "The Zephyrian delegation has arrived," she reported. "They're requesting a private meeting before the General Assembly begins." Webb nodded. The Zephyrians were former Kethmori shock troops, a warrior species that had been bred for combat and conditioned to follow orders without question. Their transformation had been particularly difficult, requiring years of psychological rehabilitation to help them remember what it meant to make choices for themselves. The meeting took place in Conference Room Alpha, a space designed to accommodate the physical needs of multiple species. The Zephyrian delegation consisted of 3 beings who resembled armored centaurs, their chitinous exoskeletons marked with the ritual scars that indicated their former rank in the Kethmori military hierarchy. Their leader, who had chosen the human name Marcus in honor of Webb's role in their liberation, stepped forward with movements that still carried military precision despite years of deprogramming. "Dr. Webb," Marcus Zephyrian said, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that his species used to convey respect. "We bring news from the Outer Rim territories. The Kethmori remnant has made contact with the Void Dwellers." Webb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. The Void Dwellers were a mystery even to the Protari collective entities that existed in the spaces between galaxies, appearing only when civilizations reached a certain level of development. Their intentions were unknown, but their power was absolute. "What kind of contact?" Webb asked. The Zephyrian's scarred mandibles clicked nervously. "An alliance. The remnant offers to serve as intermediaries, to help the Void Dwellers harvest the energy patterns of our new cooperative civilization." Through the neural network, Webb felt the collective consciousness react with something approaching alarm. The Protari had encountered the Void Dwellers once before, during the height of their own civilization. The meeting had ended with the Protari retreating to their home galaxy and abandoning their expansion into intergalactic space. "They feed on complexity," the ancient memories whispered. "Cooperative civilizations generate patterns of energy they find appetizing." "How long do we have?" Webb asked. "Unknown. The remnant is gathering ships from the Outer Rim, but their numbers are still small. Perhaps 2 years before they can mount a significant offensive with Void Dweller support." Webb thanked the delegation and immediately called an emergency session of the Hybrid Council. Within hours, representatives from across the galaxy were connected through the quantum communication network that had replaced the old Kethmori control systems. Dr. Lisa Park, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, appeared on the main screen from her position aboard the exploration vessel Harmony. The years had been kind to her. Integration had halted the aging process, and her eyes sparkled with the wisdom of the collective. "The situation is more complex than we initially thought," she reported. "We've been analyzing the energy patterns from Void Dweller space, and we're seeing something unprecedented. They're not just harvesting civilizations, they're collecting them." "Collecting?" Webb asked. "Like specimens. Our analysis suggests that the Void Dwellers maintain pocket dimensions where they preserve the consciousness patterns of every species they encounter. It's not destruction, it's eternal imprisonment." Colonel Jackson, one of the few humans who had remained completely unintegrated, joined the conversation from his position as Director of Earth Defense. Age had finally caught up with him, but his strategic mind remained sharp. "So what are our options?" he asked. "We can't fight beings that exist outside normal spacetime." Webb felt the collective consciousness analyzing the problem, millions of minds working in parallel to find solutions. The Protari had been preparing for another confrontation with the Void Dwellers for 70,000 years, but they had never expected to face them as part of a cooperative civilization. "There is a possibility," the collective whispered. "Dangerous, but possible." "The sleeper network," Webb said aloud, understanding immediately. "We could expand it." "Expand how?" Park asked. Webb called up holographic displays showing the galaxy's current state. Points of light marked the locations of sleeper installations, each one connected to the others through quantum entanglement fields that transcended normal space. The Protari built their network to defend against the Kethmori, he explained. But the underlying technology is adaptable. If we could create a galaxy-spanning consciousness network, linking every cooperative species, we might be able to generate energy patterns too complex for the Void Dwellers to harvest. And the cost? Jackson asked grimly. Webb hesitated. Through the network, he could sense the calculations being performed by the collective. The numbers were staggering. Complete integration for approximately 60% of the galaxy's population, he admitted. Voluntary, but extensive. We'd be creating a hybrid civilization on a scale never before attempted. The discussion that followed lasted for 18 hours. Representatives from dozens of species weighed in, their voices carrying the concerns and hopes of trillions of beings. Some argued for finding a way to hide from the Void Dwellers. Others proposed attempting to negotiate. But in the end, the choice was made by the youngest voice in the assembly. Sarah Webb Marcus's daughter, now a xenocultural specialist working with recently liberated species, spoke from a research station in the Andromeda Contact Zone. I've been working with a former Kethmori slave species, she said, her image appearing on screens throughout the galaxy. Do you know what they all have in common? They remember being free. Even after centuries of enslavement, they never forgot what it felt like to make their own choices. She paused, looking directly at her father through the quantum link. The Void Dwellers want to collect us like butterflies pinned to a board. They want to preserve us in eternal stasis, thinking they're honoring our complexity. But complexity without growth isn't life, it's just a very sophisticated form of death. Her words resonated through the network, carrying the weight of truth that even the collective consciousness recognized. We choose to grow, she continued. We choose to become something the Void Dwellers have never seen before. Not a civilization they can collect, but a form of life they can't understand. The vote was unanimous. The Great Integration began immediately. Across the galaxy, sleeper installations that had been dormant for millennia began to activate. The network expanded exponentially, growing not through conquest but through invitation. Entire species volunteered to join the hybrid consciousness, adding their unique perspectives to the collective while maintaining their individual identities. The transformation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Cities began to reshape themselves according to the needs of multiple species simultaneously. Art and music evolved into forms that could be appreciated by minds with entirely different sensory modalities. Science advanced in leaps as different ways of thinking combined to solve problems that had seemed impossible. Webb, now serving as one of the primary nodes in the network, experienced the integration from the inside. His consciousness expanded to encompass not just human and Protari perspectives, but those of the crystalline harmonists, the energy-based flux dancers, the living planet gardeners, and dozens of other species. It was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. When the Kethmori remnant arrived 18 months later, supported by 3 Void Dweller entities, they found a galaxy that defied comprehension. The hybrid civilization didn't fight them, it welcomed them, offering integration instead of resistance. The Void Dwellers themselves were momentarily confused. They had expected to find complex patterns suitable for harvesting. Instead, they discovered something that violated their understanding of how consciousness worked, a collective mind that grew more complex with each new addition, that generated patterns of beauty and innovation that couldn't be preserved in stasis. Impossible, the Void Dwellers communicated, their thoughts rippling through dimensions that normal matter couldn't perceive. Complexity must be static to be preserved. Then you've never really understood complexity, Webb replied, speaking for the entire hybrid civilization. True complexity isn't a thing, it's a process. It's not something you can collect. It's something you can only experience. What followed wasn't a battle but a revelation. The hybrid civilization didn't try to destroy the Void Dwellers or force them to change. Instead, it simply continued to grow, to create, to become something that transcended the Void Dwellers' categories of understanding. The Kethmori remnant, faced with the choice between joining the transformation or remaining tools of beings who could no longer understand what they were trying to accomplish, chose integration. Even some of the Void Dwellers, fascinated by patterns they had never encountered, began to experiment with temporary forms of consciousness that could participate in the hybrid network. Years passed. The galaxy became something unprecedented, a cooperative civilization that spanned multiple dimensions, incorporating forms of life that ranged from quantum-scale intelligence to planet-sized organisms. Art, science, and philosophy advanced at rates that would have been impossible under the old paradigm. Webb, his consciousness now distributed across thousands of nodes throughout the galactic network, felt a deep satisfaction. Humanity had not just survived first contact with an alien species, it had helped create something entirely new. But perhaps the most remarkable thing was how fundamentally human the hybrid civilization remained. Despite incorporating the perspectives of countless species, the network still carried the essential human qualities that had made integration possible in the first place: curiosity, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to accept that the universe couldn't be improved. Standing in the same observation deck where his journey had begun, Webb watched as new ships arrived at New Geneva Station. These vessels carried representatives from species beyond the Milky Way, attracted by reports of the remarkable civilization that had emerged from what should have been a simple harvesting operation. The Void Dwellers had brought their servants to Earth, expecting to find another world ready for collection. Instead, they had awakened something that would spread throughout the universe, transforming the very concept of what civilization could become. They had brought their army to Earth. And humanity had buried it here, in a grave that became a garden, where cooperation bloomed from the soil of conquest, and where the seeds of a new kind of existence took root among the stars. The age of harvesting was over. The age of growth had begun. And it would never end.